Well, thanks everyone for joining this morning's community call around Regen Ledger v2.0. Obviously, there's been some really good community discussion in the forums and one-on-one and other places, and we wanted to create a space in the context that the signaling proposal, it's got about 4 or 5 days left, and currently it's got near 100%, I believe, approval, which is going to put in motion, with its passing, a full governance proposal to fully upgrade to 2.0 right on the heels of that. So relative to people's concerns or questions or comments or excitement around v2.0 and what it means for Regen Network and the ecosystem, today is your opportunity to share those and to have a conversation back and forth. I just do want to note, bienvenidos, Hyun. We do have at least one Spanish speaker on the call, and want to be respectful of making sure we create space and time for translation to occur. So Patrick, if you could help guide us as needed there, that would be helpful. And other than that, I just want to remind you that the call is being recorded, and we'll make this available as a community resource as well. So with all of that said, Gregory, I don't know if you want to just set any other framing before we open it up. I'm happy to play a loose facilitator role, but otherwise, the group is small enough. I think there's around 10 of us to have a kind of lively back and forth communication. You're muted, Gregory.
Oops. It sounds great. I don't really have anything to add. I would love to just start with, it'd be great to start with Patrick and Hyun, really mostly on the logistics side to start, just how, and maybe you guys have already planned this, but what does it look like for us to be going slow enough, and what's the plan for translation and just sort of engagement there, so that we can incorporate that into how we're communicating.
Que es para nosotros decidir el ritmo de la reunión para poder ir traduciendo y entendiendo bien. Well, so we'll figure it out as we go. I think the thing for people to keep in mind is if you go on a long monologue, then I'll interrupt you so that I can translate a bit, and then you can keep going.
Great.
Another option, I feel like there should be in the future, if this is something that we're trying to do, we can have a dedicated translator, right? And actually have 2 audio channels going. That would be the proper way to do that. And then it wouldn't also be we could have multiple Spanish speakers who weren't necessarily in the same physical space.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, and I think, on a resourcing level, in a practical matter, that is something that we need to incorporate on a resource, just to create space for.
Dice que hay la opción de hacer como eso que vimos el otro día, donde hay varios canales y uno puede cambiar a escuchar portugués o inglés o español, y hay alguien haciendo interpretación simultánea.
Great. Well,
por ahora vamos a hacer así.
I wonder if it would be useful, maybe just to more practically, Corey, I don't know if it might be useful for you to just kind of explain the process, or even if there's anything from the development side that's worth kind of helping organize kind of where we're at now and what's next with the governance proposals, and what anything unique about the Regen Ledger that may not be, this group may not be aware of. And that could be a way of doing it, or we can just jump Patrick and Hyun right into some of the issues that you've raised. I'm fine with either way, whatever is easiest to organize a conversation.
I think the second approach might be better. I feel like there's the signaling proposal, I think, does a good job at outlining what we're doing with 2.0 and what the current like thinking is from R&D's like proposal perspective. And I'm here to help like clarify any of the questions around like what is the way that we've architected the data model on chain, like differentiation between credit type and credit class and and to help navigate some of those conversations. But I feel like it's easier to do that when I hear like how folks are thinking about that stuff already. Yeah.
Great. So Patrick, do you want to, you and Hyun want to hold the floor and take the time you need to kind of outline some of the things that you've raised that have been part of our community discussion?
Okay. Okay. So there are different pieces of what the update includes. I guess for context, so Hyun and I are working on figuring out what would a DAO, a community staking DAO, look like here in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And so that's where we're coming at this from. Okay, so how does all of this relate to the community staking governance model and the idea that that governance, yeah, that there will be well, everything that the community staking governance model implies, that people on the ground will have a voice in decision making in the system. So that's part of where we're coming from. Entonces digo que no, pues para que entiendan el contexto, nosotros estamos trabajando para entender cómo sería esto del community staking DAO aquí, y desde ahí vienen nuestras preguntas. Entonces eso es lo que ya dije en inglés. The other part, in order to talk with folks here about, okay, so the Regen network is doing XYZ, and we're invited to participate in the governance. There's both the logistical side of how would a community staking DAO be run sort of technically and logistically, and the details of that process with Regen Foundation. And then there's also the question of what is Regen Network? How does it work? Who is it for? So that people can form and can create an informed opinion about governance decisions on the network. Because, yeah, entonces hay la parte logística y técnica de cómo funciona el DAO, y hay la parte de entender qué es Regen Network, para quién es, cómo funciona, y solo ahí uno puede formar una opinión acerca de la gobernanza. So that's been a lot of our effort so far, and also looking at both proposals of what could Regen Network do, and also looking at critiques of ecosystem service payments, carbon credits, carbon markets, how those things have worked on the ground so far, so that we can also think about what needs to change about those systems. Entonces también estamos investigando todo este de mercados de carbono y pagos por sistemas, por servicios de ecosistemas, para entender qué ha pasado ya en el mundo y qué tendría que cambiar para que sea algo bueno, si es que eso es posible. Okay, I think that's sort of where we're at. So we'll pass it on to whoever wants to talk. I see Ravati's hand.
Thanks for the context. I think for a community conversation, what's usually helpful is as we speak, and especially as we are bringing a topic up, usually it's like this is the Indian folktale, but I don't know if you all have it, when there's an elephant in the room and there are 6 blind men and each one of them touches it at different parts. So one guy says it's long and bushy like the elephant tail. The other one says it's flappy like the elephant ear, and each of it is different. So I think it's helpful for each of us to say where we come from and which part of the elephant we're looking at, kind of, right? So with that context, I mean, perhaps Patrick and Hyun, you could talk about specifically the indigenous community you're coming from and the context of the existing services or so on, or the systems that you are familiar with, which have not worked, and why that matters for you in terms of governance, which have worked and which have not worked, and what that means in terms of governance for you, and why this specific signaling proposal, how that fits into the context, right? So the lens through which you're looking at the signaling proposal, and maybe the next person who picks up the talking stick as it goes around can do that as well, the lens with which they are looking at.
Dice, quizás podemos compartir como más detalle dónde estamos y qué estamos pensando, o sea, qué hemos visto aquí, qué ha funcionado, qué no ha funcionado, como para que entiendan más nuestra perspectiva. ¿Queremos contar algo de sociobosque o contar?
Sociobosque, bueno, eso es lo más parecido con el mercado del carbono.
O de cualquier parte de lo que hemos aprendido, hemos visto. ¿Quieres contar algo tú? ¿No? Okay. Entonces, so in Ecuador, there's a program called Sociobosque, which is a government-run carbon credit program that's been around for a few years. And in the Ecuadorian law, the government is in charge of regulating ecosystem service markets. So that's part of sort of the technical detail. But there are strange things like if a community signs up for Sociobosque and then they want to leave, then they have to pay back everything that they received through Sociobosque. So there are communities where, for example, over the period of time they've been involved in Sociobosque, they've gotten $10 million, but people on the ground haven't actually seen that money. So they say, well, we don't want this agreement, we want to get out. And so the government says, great, well, pay us back $10 million. And the community says, well, we've never seen that $10 million. So that's one example of Sociobosque. There are other communities where they're in it and they use that money for useful things. And it's working out for them. Even though there's not much explanation of how it works. It's sort of, here's the contract, sign it if you want to, and if you don't, then don't. On a larger scale, at meetings between indigenous nations, so Hyun is from the Achuar Nation of Ecuador, and I, by marriage, am now related to that. But before we were together, we both have a long history of participating in different indigenous organizations, and me in some campesino organizations, and in environmental justice organizing in Houston. I'm from near Houston, where there are more than 30 refineries in the city. So and it's very clear there who lives next to a refinery and who doesn't. And so like the Canadian tar sands come through all the way across North America and get to Houston to be somewhat refined and then exported. So I'm familiar with the sort of living in the disaster, in the sacrifice zones of fossil fuels. And when we hear proposals saying, okay, so carbon credits are going to be great because they're going to slow down climate change. But when we look at the logistics of that, and the result is that the extraction companies just keep doing what they're doing, but they pay some money to, for example, the Achuar Nation could sign up for something. There are communities that are involved in Sociobosque within the Achuar Nation. When a community signs up here and the sort of the deal is great, we're going to pay you to protect your forests, but it's not clear that who's paying them is companies that are just keep destroying other indigenous lands. At the end of the day, nothing changed, and people just kind of got duped into joining the system, the financial system. So what we're interested in are actually stopping extraction and stopping polluting industries, and at the same time developing real living local economies. So in detail with the eco credits module, for example, the RED Plus is one of the accepted methodologies that's listed on the Regen Network website. And RED Plus has been widely criticized for expanding colonialism of indigenous lands. And so there's that. And then there's other technical details like, okay, so we're going to set up a community staking DAO. And how is that really going to work? There's the permanently locked accounts, but what happens if something goes wrong? And there's the question of, so the community staking governance model, at what point does that kick in to govern Regen Network? Like there are governance decisions being made already, and Regen Network has already been around for years in development, but only now is the community staking governance model starting to be put into action. So all of these decisions that are formative to Regen Network are being taken without having the community staking DAOs in place. So it's basically Regen Network is going to get built and deployed and be functioning, and then people are going to be brought on board to say, okay, here it is. You can join in the governance decisions now that we've already made them. So I realized I'm curious to hear other people's perspectives, and we're open to hearing hopeful examples of ways of things that we're not seeing. And we've asked some questions on the forum and gotten a lot of general ideas, but we're interested in concrete examples and experiences.
Thank you, Patrick.
So that's
well stated.
Yeah.
Anyone on the call here want to jump in on that?
Can I pick up the talking stick?
Oh, please, Ravati.
Sure. So, hello, I'm Revati. I also go by Ray, and in this call, I'm wearing the hat of the Executive Director of the Regen Foundation and the foundation's towards the Community Staking DAO program, which is also the endowment program. The program is specifically to include, part of the goal is to include natural entities and indigenous communities itself into the governance of the ecological blockchain. I am also very conscious of looking at it through the lens of a technologist, because that is also who I am. And I was born and brought up in India, so I am familiar with the global south and how conservation can go wrong. So I do have a little bit of that lens and bias as well. I'll pause because I know I'm speaking fast. If Patrick, you want to translate.
pues ella se presenta como para explicar cuáles son sus perspectivas y sus como prejuicios también, que ella viene del contexto de India, donde ha visto también que a veces las cosas salen mal, y también en cuanto a conservación. Y también tiene pues su experiencia y su formación como tecnóloga, y eso, y pues es directora del Regen Foundation, encargada de crear los community staking DAOs.
I also come from a background of collective intelligence and facilitation. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the double diamond model, but essentially it talks about how within a group of people, you have emergence of something new, and which is that initially there is dissent, and it seems like everybody is going in different ways. And that's that point when they literally call it the moment of magic. And then things converge and you finally have concrete paths of moving forward. So I think here we are sort of in that path of divergence. And what I would like to do during this call is try to bring through to that point of convergence. And I do think we are looking, at least from the forum discussion, through different lenses. One is this is very concretely a technological module, and there are phases to it. And the first phase is probably just getting it out and having it be testable, right? And to get started somewhere, and we will be iterating on it. And there is another lens of, at the same time, the technology we put out has very real ramifications for people across the world. And it's really, really important how that we think about intentionally and consciously how it's governed. And that needs to be not a one-off, but like an ongoing process. So I think we kind of, collectively, we are very smart people on this call here, but are missing some of the context in the roadmap and timeline in each of our heads. And I think there is a place where both of this can happen, and which is to the mutual benefit of the community and the ledger and the network and the vision that we seek for it. And I would love to pass the talking stick along to maybe somebody who can. I share the vision, but I would love to also hear from one of you on the vision of for the module and the class, and what it really means to create classes there, and what will it mean now, what will it mean later, and what are the different stages in the roadmap, and maybe pieces we are missing here, or that maybe Patrick and Hyun would benefit from knowing.
Okay, I'm going to pick up the translation stick, and then we'll pass along the talking stick. Entonces, Brevati dice como hay un momento en muchos grupos cuando parece que cada quien tiene idea diferente, que va todo como se va a hacer todo pedazos, pero ahí conversando logran entenderse y ahí como ponerse en la misma dirección. Y que ahora estamos en un momento de que haya esta propuesta para actualizar el software y que eso como haría funcionar los créditos y varias cosas, y que o sea, cada persona que está participando, todos somos inteligentes, solo que nadie tiene el contexto completo. Entonces es cuestión de cómo articular entre el conocimiento de todos, y de lo que habíamos dicho antes, era como compartir más de cómo sociobosque no ha funcionado en algunas comunidades y en otras sí, pero que no estamos contentos. O sea, queremos que haya economías locales de abundancia, pero que no sea a través de un sistema donde las empresas que siguen contaminando y invadiendo terrenos en otros lugares lo sigan haciendo y después decir que todo está bien porque pagarán a los indígenas en hacerlo. Y que yo crecí en Houston, donde hay tanta contaminación, entonces no es algo teórico, es algo concreto que hemos vivido. ¿Qué más dije? Pues ahí en la propuesta hay la parte de cómo técnicamente, cómo se van a manejar las monedas de los staking DAOs. Entonces pusieron en esta propuesta de actualizar el software una parte que dice vamos a designar ciertas cuentas como que ya no se puede modificar más, no se puede recibir ni enviar. Entonces yo pregunté, pero ¿qué pasa? Eso apareció en la propuesta hace unos 3 o 4 días. Entonces yo pregunté, pero ¿qué pasa si perdemos las llaves? ¿O qué pasa si un grupo necesita modificar algo? Y dije, pues la idea del Community Staking DAOs es que participan en la gobernanza de Regen Network, pero se están tomando decisiones importantes como formativas, fundamentales de Regen Network ahora, y no existe ningún Community Staking DAO aún. Entonces, si todo el desarrollo va a suceder ahora y después van a invitar a participar a tomar decisiones, o cómo van, cuál es el proceso. Okidoki.
All right, would anyone else like to pick up the talking stick from the group?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Vati, do you want to go? Cool. Patrick.
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I thought I could share a little bit about the work that I do at Regen. I don't know if this is directly going to answer questions around the eco-credit module, but it might help give some context on why I'm in support of it. So I work at Regen Network with the science and registry programs. I have a background in academia, and I started my work here to help develop a methodology and run a carbon project. So my first experience in the space was kind of going through the whole process of developing a methodology, running the project, going through the verification, which is quite the extensive process, and it was a really good learning experience. And so, kind of as time went on, Regen Network, shifted from doing in-house methodology development to supporting others in developing their own methodologies. And so a large part of my work at Regen is focused on building community and working with scientists and other organizations that are focused on creating their own projects. And I think that I'm exposed to a lot of really cool organizations that are really excited about different climate action projects. And I'm really saturated in people that are engaging in really cool ways, both from a more technical perspective as well as a community building perspective. And some of the things that I've noticed is that the space is coming from somewhere that's historically siloed. Like a lot of people are just like working on their projects and not really aware of what other people are doing. And also, environmental and climate action projects are typically a little bit slow. You don't go in and plant trees one day and then they're going to be grown the next day. Typically to run these kind of projects, you have to build a relationship with the community and then do the work and find the funding. And it's typically a few-year process. And the space is becoming less siloed, but all these organizations are trying to figure out where to put their efforts. And so what we're trying to do is create an ecosystem where people can collaborate with one another. And to me, Regen Network could definitely be that place. And to help draw them in, the eco credit module is, kind of a showcase of, what we're trying to do in creating a market that doesn't just focus on carbon credits, but focuses on more holistic land management. So a lot of what we advocate for is non-carbon based credits. So things focused on like degrading water and nutrient cycles or decreased microbial activity or biodiversity. And already we're seeing quite a bit of interest and a lot of excitement for these kind of projects. Right now, carbon is the standard and carbon credits are the standard. And I think that, to build a marketplace where other types of credits can be sold, you kind of have to start with meeting the market where it's at in some ways, just because that's what people are familiar with. But, as people learn more about Regen Network and what we're doing, hopefully it will migrate in the direction of, kind of some of these other projects, which it already is. So happy to answer questions about that, if you have any.
Ok. Sam dice que viene de como para presentarse, no necesariamente tener respuesta directa a las cosas, pero como para presentarse. Y su perspectiva viene más de la academia y de la parte científica de desarrollar metodologías para medir, por ejemplo, el carbono, qué pasa con el carbono en una finca o en un bosque. Y que cuando él empezó a trabajar en Regen Network, estaban desarrollando esas metodologías como dentro de Regen Network, o sea, dentro de la empresa, de cómo medir el carbono y cómo, por ejemplo, si alguien dice mi bosque está capturando tal cantidad de carbono, tener una manera de decir, ok, ¿cómo vamos a medir eso? Entonces, cuando él inició, estaban creando esas metodologías. Y después cambió y ya no están haciendo eso dentro de Regen Network, sino están colaborando con otros grupos que vienen haciendo eso. Y que él está, o sea, donde él pasa su tiempo de trabajo, está rodeado por diferentes proyectos relacionados al clima, al cambio climático y estas cosas. Y ha visto que antes había mucho aislamiento, que cada proyecto hacía lo suyo y que no se comunicaban mucho entre ellos. Y ahora más y más hay conversación entre ellos. Y que también los proyectos suelen ser lentos. Porque hay que, por ejemplo, un proyecto quiere construir una relación con una comunidad, tiene que ir a buscar fondos, la comunidad tiene que hacer las cosas, sembrar árboles o lo que sea. Entonces tampoco son proyectos así rápidos. Y que el enfoque de Regen Network es crear un mercado que se enfoca no solamente en el carbono, sino también en el manejo más integral de los terrenos, como no solo enfocarse en carbono. Por ejemplo, uno puede simplemente sembrar muchos eucaliptos y decir ya estamos capturando carbono. Entonces la idea es darle una mirada más integral, decir ya, pero están al mismo tiempo dañando la biodiversidad sembrando solo eucalipto. Entonces están buscando metodologías que pueden cómo pueden definir cuál es un proyecto realmente regenerativo y cuál simplemente es una mentira que está capturando carbono pero sigue dañando. Y que hasta ahora en el mercado de los créditos de carbono, o sea, en el mercado de los créditos así de ecosistemas, lo más común son los créditos de carbono. Y por lo tanto piensan que hay que, como dicen, meet the market where it's at, como con todo este proceso de mercado, iniciar con eso como está, para después poder irlo modificando e incluir cosas de biodiversidad, cosas del agua, pero que de su perspectiva lo primero que hay que hacer es ya iniciar con el mercado como está. ¿Quieres? Ajá, okay. Translation complete. Hyun wants to say a few things now. Thanks.
Hola, como todos me conocen, soy Hiyu Yunkar de la Nación Achuar, de una comunidad pequeña que está en medio del bosque, como en la orilla del río Pastaza. Es la última comunidad frontera con Perú, que se llama Huachirpas. Tiene como 200 entre 300 habitantes, incluyendo niños y niñas. Estar como participando en este proceso de Regen, todo lo que, como los brazos, los pies, los ojos, las orejas que tiene que forma el Regen. Yo hablo desde la perspectiva y perspectiva de una mujer que ha crecido en el bosque, que vive en ella, y de una perspectiva más como de una achuar. Para empezar, como veo caras, muchos de este grupo de la reunión son hombres. Y solo estamos 2 mujeres. Y para mí eso es la historia, se repite como nuestras organizaciones indígenas están formadas. Por ejemplo, la Nación Achuar, toda la directiva son hombres. Solo las 2 veces últimos años han llegado las mujeres a Achuar como en la vicepresidencia. Y nuestra lucha es llegar a la presidencia y en muchos espacios también como mujer achuar. Y segundo, este proceso de Regen está empezado con un sueño, con una mirada de los hombres. Y como hablamos de que tenemos que incluir los sueños como las mujeres, pero seguimos haciendo lo mismo que todas las organizaciones. Y eso para mí me parece como todas las organizaciones que se han formado. Tercero, primero para nosotros como para construir una casa, porque este proceso de Regen me parece como, yo lo miro como una casa, pero para construir una casa, ¿qué se hace? Primero se busca los materiales, en qué terreno vamos a hacer, quiénes van a apoyar para construir esta casa y qué queremos tener en esa casa. ¿Dónde van a ir las camas? ¿Dónde van a ir la cama del lugar de los niños, lugar de las mujeres? ¿Dónde va a ser el lugar donde recibimos personas? Es un ejemplo, es como yo entiendo, pero hemos construido yo veo que este proceso se ha construido, quizás estoy equivocada, pero eso es lo que yo entiendo, lo que yo veo hasta el momento, hasta que he estado aquí en las reuniones. Se construyó la casa sin ver estas partes, y no hemos visto qué madera utilizar para construir esta casa. Entonces, hemos hecho la casa y recién estamos pensando como trabajando al revés. Y el otro ejemplo, por ejemplo, para cualquier cosa, sean la huerta, sean los proyectos, tenemos que tomar en cuenta como imaginarnos como una semilla. ¿Qué hacemos con la semilla? La semilla de cualquier fruta o árboles. Primero vemos la tierra, si esa tierra está apto para esta semilla, y también pensamos cómo va a crecer este árbol. Va a ser pequeño, ya lo sabemos desde la semilla, ya sabemos qué tipo de árbol es y para qué va a servir. Entonces nosotros ya estamos como trabajando desde el bosque, el árbol creció y estamos recién como queriendo sembrar. O sea, me parece un poco así como este proceso. Y como cuarto, para terminar, las organizaciones, por ejemplo, me enfoco más en la comunidad, en las comunidades actual porque es lo que más conozco. Todas como ejemplos de otras organizaciones que han trabajado directamente con ellos, entre comillas directamente, pero siempre toman como decisiones. Primero las organizaciones deciden y luego llevan esa decisión hacia las comunidades. Mira, esta idea es genial. Este les va a servir. O sea, otra vez por muchas veces estamos repitiendo, esto es lo que les sirve, pero no me interesa tu opinión. O sea, recién le dejamos siempre en segundo lugar a los que ya viven dentro del territorio, los que siguen cuidando lo más que pueden el bosque. Entonces, y como el Community Stake in DAO, primero tenía que crear para mí eso, para empezar a trabajar con todo lo que se ha hecho con Regen. Entonces, como no hay, para empezar este proceso, no hubo una concientización o unas preguntas con quien preguntó a los mayores, a los pueblos indígenas directamente antes de formar este proyecto. Entonces, como esas son las preguntas que todos los días me vienen en la cabeza y yo estoy siendo parte de esto, me pregunto yo, estoy siendo parte de eso y permitiendo este proceso, apoyando o pensando que sí está bien este proceso, otra vez sabiendo que fue construida solamente con los sueños de técnicos, de la gente que sabe de la computadora, de la gente que ha vivido en la ciudad, quizás que nunca ha trabajado en el bosque. También hay gente en este proceso que sí están viviendo directamente en sus tierras. Entonces, como hay muchas preguntas para mí sueltas y ahora estamos, en vez de accionar, estamos hablando demasiado, estamos escribiendo demasiado, en vez de hacer algo puntual. Entonces, esas son las cosas que me desaniman. Por ejemplo, otro día le estaba diciendo a Patrick, ¿qué es lo que necesitamos? Necesitamos como, por ejemplo, algo puntual del río Pastaza. Queremos sanear el río Pastaza. Queremos trabajar con nuestros hermanos que están en las riberas del río arriba Pastaza, donde nace el río Pastaza. Explicar la situación que pasa, pero para eso necesitamos movilizarnos, que la gente que salga hacia la ciudad, también tenemos que ver la comida, entre muchas cosas, pero para eso no tenemos economía. Entonces, o sea, yo simplemente necesito plata para accionar. Ya no quiero seguir hablando más, no quiero seguir escribiendo más, porque yo estoy cansada de seguir escuchando muchas palabras y muchos escritos que nunca se han cumplido. Por ejemplo, hace unos días la CONAIE solicitó un diálogo para presentar algunas necesidades, algunas injusticias que está pasando dentro del Ecuador. ¿Y qué hizo el gobierno? Escuchó, sí, aplaudió las manos, saludó y no dio ninguna respuesta. Entonces, como para mí, no quiero que sigamos actuando lo mismo, yo sé que hay cosas para detallar, para pensar, pero pensemos algo puntual, porque ya nos están adelantando la gente en una asociación donde está en comunidades como 7 comunidades, Achuar, que abarca la asociación humana. Algún mestizo o algún inquis entró diciendo, mira, vamos a trabajar con el mercado del carbono. Y la gente, sin entender eso, ya están poniendo en sus asambleas diciendo, sí, vamos a hablar del tema del mercado del carbono porque vamos a trabajar con eso. Otra vez ya van a hacer sin entender las cosas, mientras que nosotros seguimos hablando aquí, seguimos perdiendo tiempo hablando, reuniéndonos y haciendo otras huevadas. Disculpe que diga así, pero yo veo tantas cosas que están pasando y seguir reuniendo, hablando la misma tema, el mismo, repitiendo, estoy cansada de eso. Pero estoy aquí con muchos ánimos, con lo que puedo aportar, con lo que puedo decir y pues hacer lo mejor que podemos hacer. Y tampoco caigamos en las mismas situaciones, en la misma historia de otras organizaciones que se han hecho.
¿Quieres decir?
Como parte de eso, he estado en Europa, he estado en Estados Unidos, he estado en Colombia, he estado en la parte de la Amazonía de Brasil, en parte de la Amazonía de Perú, y hay mucha gente que está pasando de esto, que se quedan sin territorio, sin bosque, y la ciudad sigue creciendo. O sea, he visto muchas cosas que pasan, injusticias, y de verdad me molesta, sinceramente me molesta de seguir simplemente hablando. Y yo he venido hablando como desde como Achuar es conversar, hablar y dialogar, pero siempre hemos hecho algo puntual. Y esto de seguir hablando de un proceso como varias veces, ya meses, me parece ya demasiado. Pero también yo sé que este es un proceso nuevo, soñado para aportar con la clima, con medio ambiente, con nuestra madre tierra, con Pachamama, como queramos llamar. Entonces, pues estoy abierta para dialogar y gracias.
Okay, translation time. I've got notes. Okay. Dice. Hello, I'm Hiyun. I'm an Achuar woman. I was born in the forest. I grew up in the forest. And now I live near the forest. And I grew up in Huachirpas, which is a community on the Pastaza River, on the banks of the Pastaza River. It's one of the last large Achuar community before in Ecuador before the Pastaza River reaches Peru. And that's the perspective I bring, is that of a woman from the forest who has seen the things that I've seen. And I'm here to participating in Regen Network and doing my best to understand the ears and the eyes and the legs and the tail and all of these different parts that make it up. I see that there are a lot of men here, which is the same as in a lot of organizations, including the Achuar Council of Government right now of the Achuar Nation of Ecuador, which is all men except one woman. And it was the same in the previous period administration. And then all of the administrations before that, there weren't any women. And I see that in a number of organizations. There's only one other woman on this call right now. And so I understand Regen Network, building Regen Network is like building a house. we look for where we're going to build it, what are the materials we're going to use, who's going to help, how are we going to do it, what's it going to look like, where are the kids going to sleep, where are the parents going to sleep, where are we going to cook, where are we going to sit. These are all decisions that we make when we think about building a house. And this is what I see after a few months of participating in meetings about Regen Network, and learning how it works. And maybe I'm wrong, but this is what I see from where I am. That we have, if we imagine ourselves as a seed, and we ask, okay, we know what kind of seed this is, where are we going to plant it, what does it need in order to grow, and we think about these things and we make these decisions before we build a house or before we plant a seed. But in this case, it seems like the seed has already been planted, the tree is already growing, and now we're asking, where can we transplant it or something? The logic, that things seem out of order. And we're very used to, in Achuar territory, we're very used to organizations coming from outside with ideas about what they think we need, and showing up and saying, hey, here's this project, we're sure this is what you need, it'll be great. And the projects are usually thought up by people living in a city somewhere, who most of them have no idea, have no experience living in the forest or living with the land. Maybe there are people here who have that experience, I'm not sure. But that's what we're used to, is people showing up from the cities from outside, having thought up their projects and not including us in the design of the project, or asking us what we want in order to then create that. So this community staking DAO process seems like it was done backwards. Who asked the elders, who asked indigenous communities, what they wanted in order to decide to create the Regen network the way it's been created. And these are things I think about every day, ever since we started participating in Regen network. And I'm also feel frustrated to see that there's nothing concrete happening yet. There's conversations and more meetings and more writing, but I don't see any action. So, for example, something specific, the Pastassa River, we want to clean up the Pastassa River, and that means we need to mobilize and go talk to our brothers and sisters and neighbors and people who live along the Pastassa River, and that means we need money to pay for transportation and all of the things involved in the logistics of getting people out from the communities to go talk to people along the Pastassa River to start cleaning it up. So what we need is money, not more meetings. For example, of how this happens in our organizations. The CONAIE, which is the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, the Achuar Nation of Ecuador forms part of the Confederation of Indigenous Nations of the Ecuadorian Amazon, CONFENIAI, and then CONFENIAI is part of CONAIE, which unites the majority of indigenous organizations in Ecuador. So 2 days ago, fue el lunes, lo de la CONAIE, hace 2 días.
Sí.
so there's a new government in Ecuador. The president of Ecuador was elected earlier this year and took power earlier this year. And so the indigenous folks said, okay, we want to sit down and talk. And he says, okay, our hand is extended. Our arms are open for conversation. And so the CONAIE, with invited representatives of other groups in Ecuador as well, not just indigenous groups, but other popular groups, popular as in like people's groups. And they went to talk with the president, and the president said, great, well, we've heard you now, and that's all there is to that. And there's no willingness on the part of the government to change any of its priorities. It's just, okay, we heard you, now that part's done, and we're just going to keep doing what we already thought about doing. So that's a bit of the context of how communities and organizations here are used to being treated. And there's a sense of urgency because we see things happening. Like there's one of the associations that forms the Achuar Nation of Ecuador, that is made up of about 7 communities, has put on their agenda for an assembly later this month, carbon trading and sales of carbon credits. Because mestizos and gringos and people are showing up, trying to convince communities that this is a good idea without explaining it in detail, without taking time to make sure that people understand how this whole system is working. They're just coming in and pushing it as hard as they can. And so we need to be out there helping folks understand this instead of sitting around having more meetings and more talking and more writing. And at the same time, I'm here. Animo is like, I'm in somewhere between enthusiastic. I'm motivated. I'm full of energy to do what we can together. And I've been to the United States. I've been to Germany. I've been to Colombia. I've been through the jungle and visiting other communities of other cultures in Peru and Brazil. And I've seen a lot of horrible things. And I've seen a lot of communities doing their best to live well. And the Achuar culture, we also tend to sit around and have lots of conversations, but then we do something. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Okay. Creo que eso es. Ajá. De la directiva de la NAE.
Sí, también no hay muchas mujeres aquí en esta reunión.
Sí, eso.
Gracias, Hyun.
Gracias.
Gracias, Hyun. A ver, voy a hablar en español. Les saludo, soy Gregory. Hola, Hyun. Hola, Patrick. ¿Cuántos aquí pueden hablar español para saber si tengo que parar y traducir a inglés cada rato o si la mayoría me van a entender? Ok. Entonces, voy a parar cada rato. I was just asking how many people speak Spanish so I could see how long I can speak before translating back into English. Yeah, Corey doesn't speak.
Greg?
Not me.
Yeah.
Greg,
Please
do you
proceed.
want me
I'm happy to listen through
take-
translation.
Do you want me to take notes and help you translate for you, or you'll translate for yourself, or
I think I'll just translate for myself. Creo que va a traducir
Okay.
yo mismo cada rato y tratar de parar y hablar en partes cortitos para... Sí. Vamos a ver. I'll try to just speak in short chunks and then translate for myself. A ver. Primero quiero decir gracias Hyun y Patrick y gracias Hyun para hablar desde tu corazón y experiencia y, o sea, compartir un poco de la sabiduría de la experiencia que tienes, de ver todo esto que ha estado pasando en el bosque ahí. O sea, es súper importante. O sea, desde mi punto de vista, si vamos a tener algún tipo de éxito cambiando el mundo, va a ser con una conexión entre gente que están pensando y diseñando tecnología o cosas de la economía financieras y con gente que están viviendo en el bosque mismo o en una finca, también los científicos, o sea, tenemos que unirnos, ¿no? Entonces, este tipo, quiero, o sea, tal vez tengo otra opinión que tenemos que estar hablando con nosotros, entre nosotros. También tenemos que estar actuando, o sea, tomando acción. So I was just sort of saying, thank you very much, Hyun, for sharing her experience, and that I think it's really important that experience is essential and the wisdom is essential for us to have any kind of success in any of this. And I was sort of disagreeing in a friendly way, saying we do need to talk to each other in order for that connection to happen between land stewards and indigenous people and farmers and scientists and software designers. Otherwise, we won't know, what we're all thinking. Pero al mismo tiempo tenemos que tomar acción. Entonces, quería decir algunas cosas. Si ahorita hay urgencia ahí con la pastaza, ¿no es cierto? Y con muchas cosas. Entonces, yo prefiero concentrar en la pregunta, ¿cómo podemos apoyar a ustedes tomando y diseñando acciones y diseñando un sistema donde la plata va donde tiene que ir, donde la plata no se va a un intermediario y se desaparece y chao, ¿dónde se fue? ¿Y qué pasó con el río? Yo creo que mi experiencia es que siempre está pasando y no debe pasar. So I'm just saying, from my perspective, the most powerful place to have this conversation is to ground it in the needs and the actions that Hyun and Patrick and other people see as necessary. See the Pastaza River is polluted and needs to be healed, then let's talk about how to do that and where the money needs to flow and how that can happen. And let's build those solutions based on something concrete, right? Tal vez merece hablar un ratito sobre mi experiencia y de dónde viene la visión y la inspiración de la red de Regen, ¿no es cierto? Aunque Hyun conoces a Patrick y desde Patrick o por medio de Patrick me conoces a mí un poco, creo que todavía, o sea, un poquitito de contexto tal vez sería bueno. So I'm just saying maybe it's useful for me to just share a little bit of context about where the vision for Regen Network came from and where I think we're at with all of that, because although Hyun sort of knows me and others on the call know of me in different ways or know about the vision, maybe it's still a useful thing to just talk about a little bit. A ver, ¿dónde empiezo? Yo creo que mi experiencia es un poco de una mezcla, ¿no? Yo, hasta el punto que fundimos Regen Network, 100% de mis ingresos económicos vinieron de trabajar directamente con la tierra o apoyando gente que estaban trabajando con la tierra en agroforestería, permacultura, agroecología, trabajando conjunto con asociaciones de productores y cooperativas y tratando de enfrentar los problemas ahí en el suelo, en el bosque mismo. Y la visión de entonces cuando tú preguntas con quiénes hablemos, los viejos, las indígenas, los campesinos, cuando era la época de consultoría con gente que viven de la tierra. Desde mi punto de vista, y puede ser equivocado, ¿no? O sea, es de base. Y yo... pero toda la inspiración vino de estas conversaciones. Entonces, cuando yo leo, es muy raro, cuando yo leo algunos de los documentos que se mandó Patrick, ¿no? De voces indígenas o de voces en contra del mercado neoliberal y todo este onda, es muy interesante. Primer punto, conozco muchos de los autores. Entonces, hablé con ellos y comparto también muchos de sus opiniones. Pero al mismo tiempo, lo que estamos tratando de hacer se nace de este contexto y está tratando de tomar acción concreto en una manera diferente. Entonces, quiero decir dos cositas. Uno es, no estamos construyendo una casa. Ni estamos sembrando un árbol. Estamos creciendo un ecosistema. Entonces, el primer arbusto, estamos hablando del primer arbusto que está creciendo, del módulo de créditos, pero no es la casa completa ni un solo árbol, es solo una plantita que da sombra a todas las otras plantitas que tenemos que sembrar para tener todo un ecosistema que va a tener la diversidad para tener éxito. So I was just saying a couple of things there. One thing that I was saying is, you know, my background and where the vision comes from is a long time of working directly with people, land stewards, indigenous people on the ground. And that was the time, at least for me, in which there was a lot of conversations with grandmothers and grandfathers and elders that directly influenced like how we're approaching Regen Network and why we've done things the way that we have. And I'm also, I didn't manage to express this clearly, maybe Patrick can help me out, but what I was trying to express is, and maybe that wasn't enough, and probably it wasn't enough, but that's part of the context of like where this all came from. So it's not to say, oh, we already checked that box, but that's it's part of the reality. And do you mind just translating that for me really quickly, Patrick, before I translate the second chunk of what I was saying into English?
Entonces dice, como no está seguro si llegó de castellano, el sentido de que los años que pasó colaborando, por ejemplo, con los de cacao, en varios países, visitando, él a veces trabajando en su propia finca o visitando otras personas, otras organizaciones, conversando con ellos, conversando con abuelas y abuelos. Para él, como esta cuestión de dónde nace la visión y quién consultó a los mayores de las comunidades, él siente como que esos años de su vida y todas las conversaciones que tuvo con esas personas, eso es de ahí que nace esto. Y eso fue el momento. Y al mismo tiempo reconoce que quizás eso probablemente no fue suficiente. Y no.
So there's a last bit that I was speaking that I should translate to English for everyone. I'm sort of forgetting exactly where it was going. Well, I was just sort of, I was also doing a friendly disagreement. Yeah, the house. I was doing a friendly disagreement with the really great metaphors of the house and the tree, and asking us to consider that actually what we're growing is an ecosystem, not a single tree, and we're not building a single house. And so, for instance, the eco credit module is just a little bush. It's just a little baby bush, but that baby bush is going to provide the shade for other things to grow, bigger trees and other species. And so and también quiero decir, hay un, ¿cómo es en español? Paradox. Paradoxio. ¿Es una palabra?
Paradoja.
Paradoja. Hay una paradoja hay una paradoja aquí, que estamos ahora conversando sobre el primer voto importante de la red, aquí conjuntos, con los representantes del Community Staking DAO y el desarrollo. Pero al mismo tiempo, o sea, y es emergente, podemos hacer varias cosas, podemos diseñarlo en una manera, pero al mismo tiempo tenemos que tomar acción, al mismo tiempo tenemos que diseñarlo todo para tenerlo bien y una visión clara, pero al mismo tiempo tenemos que ir despacio para que todos los voces puedan unir. Y es bueno, estas tensiones, estos paradojas son lo que da vida a algo real. Desde mi punto de vista, cuando entramos en una conversación y todo parece claro, y todo parece, y alguien está diciendo, todo está hecho, no tienes que ni dar cuenta de todo, te voy a dar la plata y todo bien. Este es cuando tenemos que estar muy ojos, ¿no? So just to like end that, I'm sort of saying there's a paradox that we have here trying to do this right, trying to grow this ecosystem, which is that on one hand, we are actually having a community conversation about the first network upgrade and the most important, like there's some functionality. We haven't had functionality. We're building the functionality to take concrete action. And on the other hand, and that's sort of serving inclusion. But on the other hand, we need to have a concrete, clear vision that we can all tune into in order to sort of like be moving in the same direction. And on the other hand, we need to sort of, take action quickly. And there's all these paradoxes that we're stuck in between where, and sort of what I was asking to consider the possibility that those paradoxes are actually what makes it possible to do something real. That complexity and the paradoxes between trying to have a clear, concrete vision everybody has, but also leave it incomplete so that people can participate. To be engaging in real governance right now in this moment about hard questions, while at the same time having done a lot of work in the past, those sorts of paradoxes or tensions are actually what makes it maybe viable. And that, be careful when someone comes and says that they have it all figured out, because those are the moments that, maybe danger is there. If somebody's just trying to sell you a completed solution, it's probably not the best opportunity. Entonces, en fin, yo creo que el módulo del ecocréditos y este es el punto de este acto de gobernanza en que estamos participando ahora. Es algo súper básico que puede ser usado en diferentes maneras. Podría ser usado en maneras malas. Podría ser usado para hacer lo mismo que los mercados existentes están haciendo. Y este es un riesgo. Es un riesgo que tenemos que dar en cuenta y enfrentar como comunidad. Pero por el otro lado, se da la posibilidad en una comunidad abierta para hacer algo creativo que es muy diferente, donde podemos tomar acciones como comunidad para el salud del río Pastaza, donde podemos crear nuevas clases de créditos que vienen de la corazón del bosque mismo, en vez de ser diseñado en Geneva y que aterrizan ahí en la Amazonía, podemos tener un proceso, pero este proceso va a demorar, ¿no? El diseño y desarrollo de sistemas para valorar salud del ecosistema demora un poco. O sea, porque es complejo y porque tiene que venir desde procesos sociales y ecológicos al fondo. Entonces, es otro paradoxo. Tenemos que, o sea, servir un mercado existente que tiene que transformar y que no está, y que no nos va, no es un río que nos va a traer al mar. El mercado actual no sirve, pero al mismo tiempo tenemos que interactuar con este mercado porque es lo que existe y tenemos que tener la visión de otra manera. Tal vez ni es mercado, pero es un intercambio de valor. Y este paradoxo es muy complejo y yo no tengo respuesta mágico, solo creo que tenemos que enfrentarlo y para terminar mi discurso, lo siento que es tan largo, yo prefiero poner energía en la pregunta cómo regeneramos el río Pastaza y cómo basamos algo en un piloto real y cómo tomamos acciones concretas juntos y cómo financiamos eso y qué tiene que ver con el modelo de créditos que estamos pensando en poner ahí en Regen Ledger, en el blockchain. Entonces, gracias por escuchar. Voy a terminar traduciendo última parte y de ahí parar. So I was just sharing there at the end that my instinct here and my hope is to actually focus on something very concrete together, which is, for instance, how do we regenerate the Pastaza River? What does that actually look like? How do we support that? How does the eco module support that or not? You know, what other things would need to be built or already exist to make those actions happen? And that if we can center the conversation on something concrete and co-creative, then we can learn together and figure out how that influences the rest of the system, because it's sort of growing as an ecosystem, not just as a master planned house. And we have to sort of source from we just have to source our understanding in a more fluid way, I think, because we don't have the answers, all of the answers here. So I'm going to pause there, and that's all I have to say.
If it's okay, I'd like to just interject very quickly and just note another component of this reality is that when we started design for the credit module, that was in maybe March or April of 2020. That was before we had launched mainnet. That was before we had anybody working at Regen Foundation. I'm not 100% sure, but we might, I'm not even sure if at that point in time we had actually a legal entity for the foundation, perhaps. We and we certainly didn't have the Regen Forum. So there is a lot of history to this work that I think we did an improper job of when we started actually having a forum and actually having discussions around community staking DAOs, of at a very early stage getting people up to speed with what the current most immediate roadmap items were. And so I can understand how it was potentially very confusing when all of a sudden the first kind of rich in content post about the software and the features that were being launched was the signaling proposal, and this content that was like, here is the plan all figured out. And, you know, as Gregory is pointing to, like, this is one bush, this is one element of what will be a lot of other things to come potentially, and a lot of other things that we have to like co-create. And I think now that we have these forums and these other, you know, larger community stakeholders that we're trying to engage with, we need to rethink about how specification happens from start to finish, and where, you know, the larger community plays a role in that. But yeah, just to note that a lot of these specification processes for this upgrade that we're doing now are things that actually have been in the design phase since before a lot of these lines of communication even existed.
Corey, could you, just for context, say a little bit about what your role is in Regen Network?
Yeah, totally. So I joined Regen Network in February of last year, kind of as a technical product manager, one of the first folks on the engineering team who was involved a bit more on the kind of project management and product management side of things as well. And since then, you know, we've grown the engineering team, and I've been managing and kind of leading the engineering team alongside Aaron, our CTO. And so my work is more strictly on the engineering side. You know, we've recently hired actually a product lead, Darren Kong, who's not here on this call, and you know, he's taking a bit more ownership over the product direction of stuff. But my role is more on on engineering and working with our engineers, and historically did involve some specification and some of the architectural work as well.
Cool. Okay, a traducir. So Corey, ¿te acuerdas el que tenía los bigotes y las flores en el lanzamiento? Corey, él empezó a trabajar con Regen Network en febrero del año pasado, o sea, justo antes de que inició la pandemia. Y está como más del lado técnico. Dice que tenía título como gerente técnico del producto, y que ahora lidera el equipo de ingeniería en conjunto con Aaron, Aaron no está aquí, Aaron está más específicamente enfocado en la parte de ingeniería, y Corey hace un poco de como del parte público también. Y dice que él entiende, o sea, puede ver cómo se parece raro todo esto, como parece que de repente, desde lo que parecía la nada, llegan esta propuesta todo hecho. Y es porque este proceso de diseño empezó en marzo y abril del año pasado. O sea, hace un año y medio. De diseñar el módulo de los ecocréditos. Cuando no existía la fundación, no existía el foro, no existían los community staking DAOs, que aún no existen. Y que quizás, o sea, mirándolo desde esa perspectiva, quizás nos equivocamos. Dice.
Sí, hemos equivocado. Eso hay que aceptarlo.
Ajá. Y que debemos repensar cómo hacemos como la especificación, que la especificación es cuando, como yo entiendo cómo trabajan, unas personas dicen, ya necesitamos un software que hace esto. eso es la especificación. No, es como diseñar algo. Es como otra palabra para decir el diseño. O sea, está diciendo necesitamos repensar cómo hacemos el diseño. Porque antes todo esto lo hicimos sin consultar a otra gente. Diseño es como sentarnos y decir, ajá, es eso de lo que tú dijiste de la casa. De tenemos que pensar cómo lo vamos a hacer, con qué materiales, para quién, dónde van a dormir los niños, dónde vamos a cocinar, quién va a apoyar a hacerlo. Eso es el diseño. Específicamente es esa parte de cómo va a quedar la casa y cómo se va a utilizar. Entonces, esa parte está diciendo tenemos que repensar porque no, la verdad es que no consultamos porque no teníamos los medios de comunicación para consultar.
I would just, it may have been an incomplete and mistaken process, but I also think it's important to understand that it was a long process and included consulting the community the entire time. And so, you know, you two are currently valued community members, but weren't in the community at that time. And so there was a process in which the community that we had, which included a lot of farmers, right? We socialized it mostly an open team, right? And so the bulk of the community consultation was within open team, which, you know, is an incomplete community, but that's the, you know, that's the process that we had available to us.
Go ahead, Corey.
I know that we're already like at the half an hour over of what you had asked for us to extend to, but I do feel like with all of this context setting, it would be really valuable to have some kind of concrete conversation to make sure that we're all understanding questions around what the scope of the upgrade proposal actually does entail. If people would like to go there, I don't know, it feels like it would be a missed opportunity to have all of this context building and not actually talk to some of the content of the upgrade.
I agree. And my only issue is I have to take my children to school here in a minute. So I'm happy to hand the host duties over to somebody if folks can stay on.
Estamos sobre las 10 y dice que tenían, de hecho, planificado terminar hace
I can
media
take
hora.
that on if it's for the next 10 or
¿Quién
15.
puede
Great.
mantener?
I'll just make you Ravati the
Gregory
host.
dice que mientras sí es verdad lo que dice el Corey, también es verdad que la comunidad, o sea, las personas que participaban en Regen Network, más allá de los empleados directos, sí pusieron sus opiniones durante ese proceso de crear este software. Sobre todo eran gente como granjeros que estaban vinculados con OpenTree.
Una pregunta sin respuestas se ha quedado.